It happened on a busy afternoon downtown, a place where the noise of traffic and voices drowned out almost everything, except for the soft, soulful notes of an old street musician's guitar. His fingers, though worn and tired, still played with passion. Every strum carried a story of loss, hope, and survival. But as he closed his eyes, lost in his melody, a shadow moved behind him, a teenage boy, desperate and reckless, reaching for the musician's small bag of earnings. In a heartbeat, the music stopped, the world froze, and the boy ran. The old man shouted, stumbling to his feet, but his frail body couldn't match the speed of youth. The few dollars he had earned that day vanished down the crowded street. People watched, some murmuring, others pretending not to notice. It was just another crime in a city too busy to care. But what the boy didn't know was that someone else had seen everything. 3 men on motorcycles parked a few feet away, their engines silent, their eyes sharp. They were not police officers. They were not heroes. But they had their own kind of justice. The bikers followed quietly, their presence unnoticed at first. The boy turned corners, clutching the stolen money, his breath short and heart racing. He thought he had escaped. But when he reached an empty alley, the rumble of engines echoed behind him, deep and thunderous, like a warning from fate itself. He froze. The sound grew louder, closer, until the 3 bikes stopped only a few feet away. The riders dismounted slowly, their boots heavy against the pavement. The boy's fear was instant. His voice trembled as he tried to explain, but they didn't need words. One of the bikers, a tall man with a calm, yet commanding presence, knelt to his level. "That money," he said, "belonged to a man who earns it by heart, not by theft. So now, you'll pay him back, not with cash, but with courage." The boy didn't understand, but he soon would. Because what they were about to do wasn't punishment, it was transformation. And that's how, within hours, a trembling teenager stood in the middle of a crowded street with a borrowed guitar in his hands, surrounded by the same bikers who had chased him. The crowd gathered, curious, waiting. The old musician watched from a distance, unsure what was happening. The boy swallowed hard, his hands shaking, but then he played. And what happened next would turn that small act of redemption into something unforgettable, not just for him, but for everyone who witnessed it. The crowd was silent at first, a strange kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. The boy stood there, the guitar trembling in his hands. The same hands that had stolen only hours before now shook for a different reason: fear. The bikers stood behind him, their arms crossed, their faces unreadable. They hadn't raised a hand against him, nor spoken a harsh word. Their justice wasn't about pain, it was about truth. "Play," one of them said softly, his voice low but firm. "Show them who you are when you're not running." The boy hesitated, his eyes darting toward the old musician standing at the edge of the crowd. The man's face was calm but distant. His expression didn't carry anger, only disappointment, the kind that cuts deeper than fury ever could. The boy looked down at the guitar. It was scratched and weathered, much like the man who owned it. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he strummed the first chord. The sound cracked in the air, raw, unsure, but real. Something shifted in the crowd. People leaned closer, their murmurs fading as the boy began to find rhythm. His voice, soft at first, grew stronger with each verse. He sang about hunger, about loneliness, about making choices that felt wrong but seemed like the only way to survive. His voice carried pain, but also honesty, an honesty that no one expected from a thief. The melody was broken but beautiful, like redemption trying to take shape through sound. The old musician's eyes softened. He recognized the emotion in every note, the same desperation he once felt when the world had turned its back on him. Slowly, he stepped forward, the lines on his face illuminated by the streetlight. When the boy's song ended, the silence returned, but this time, it wasn't heavy. It was reverent. One of the bikers reached into his pocket and dropped a handful of bills into the open guitar case. Then another did the same. Soon, strangers followed. The same crowd that had judged now gave freely. By the end of it, the case was filled, not with money, but with forgiveness. The boy looked up, tears streaking his face. He hadn't just repaid what he stole. He had reclaimed something far greater, his dignity. After the performance, the crowd began to disperse, but the moment lingered in the air like a ghost. The boy stood frozen, unsure of what to say or do. The old musician approached slowly, his steps measured. The boy braced for anger, but instead, the old man reached out and gently took the guitar from his hands. "You played with heart," he said. "That's something money can't buy." His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the weight of years spent forgiving the world's cruelty. The boy lowered his head, ashamed. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I didn't know what else to do." The old man sighed, the kind of sigh that carries both exhaustion and empathy. "You're not the first to steal when you're lost," he said softly. "But don't stay lost. Promise me that." The boy nodded, tears returning. In that moment, it was no longer about punishment or pity. It was about two souls who had both known hunger, pain, and the fight to survive. The bikers watched from a distance, their engines silent, but their presence powerful. Mason, the leader, walked forward and placed a firm hand on the boy's shoulder. "You've got music in you," he said. "Don't waste it." The boy looked up, confused. Mason smiled faintly. "You pay back what you took. Now pay it forward. The next time you see someone struggling, you help them stand, just like we did for you." The boy nodded again, though his throat tightened at the thought. He had been given something rare: mercy. The kind that doesn't erase your mistakes, but teaches you to use them. For the first time in his young life, he didn't feel like a criminal. He felt like someone who mattered, someone who could be more than what his choices had made him. That night, as the bikers rode away, their engines thundered like the heartbeat of justice. The boy and the old musician stood side by side, watching them vanish into the horizon. The sound faded, but the lesson did not. Sometimes, the loudest redemption comes not from punishment, but from the chance to make something right, with your own hands, your own heart, and your own song. In the days that followed, the boy couldn't get the sound of those engines out of his head. Every time he heard a motorcycle rumble in the distance, his heart would race, not out of fear, but out of something deeper: gratitude. The memory of that night replayed over and over. The weight of the guitar, the warmth of the crowd, the look of forgiveness in the old musician's eyes. For the first time, he began to believe that maybe he wasn't doomed to repeat his mistakes. Maybe, just maybe, he could build something better. He started returning to that same street every evening. But this time, he didn't come to take, he came to help. The old musician allowed him to sit beside him, to play backup, to learn. The first few nights were awkward. People didn't recognize him as the same boy who had stolen. But the old man did something extraordinary. He introduced him to everyone. "This is my partner," he would say proudly. "He's got a story to tell." Those words hit the boy like sunlight breaking through years of shadow. They played together daily, their music blending into something that carried both pain and hope. The boy's voice grew stronger, his confidence steadier. The streets that once felt like a battlefield now became his stage. Sometimes, Mason and a few bikers would show up quietly at the edge of the crowd. They didn't intervene or speak, they just listened. And when the boy finished his song, they'd nod before disappearing into the night. That simple gesture meant everything. It was silent proof that they still believed in him. But not everyone shared that belief. One afternoon, an old acquaintance from his past cornered him near the alley where it all began. "So this is you now?" the boy sneered. "Playing songs instead of surviving?" The boy froze. Old instincts kicked in, defensiveness, anger. But then he remembered the words Mason had told him. "You can't change your past, but you can change what comes next." He looked the kid in the eye and simply said, "Yeah, this is me now." Then he turned his back and walked away, guitar in hand, leaving the past behind him for good. That night, when he told the old musician what had happened, the man just smiled. "You didn't fight," he said. "You played your piece." The boy didn't fully understand what that meant, but it stayed with him. He realized that sometimes strength isn't about hitting back. It's about standing firm in who you've become, even when the world tries to drag you backward. Weeks turned into months, and the duo became local legends. Their performances began to draw larger crowds: tourists, workers, even other musicians who came to listen and learn. The old man's melodies carried wisdom, while the boy's lyrics gave them life. Together, they told stories of redemption, hardship, and love lost and found again. The boy's voice, once timid and uncertain, now carried power. He sang with the conviction of someone who had lived every note he played. One evening, as they packed up after a show, the old musician sat down and looked at him with tired eyes. "You've got something special," he said, "but my time here is almost done. The music will be yours soon." The boy shook his head instantly. Don't say that. We're just getting started. The old man chuckled softly. That's the thing about life. It passes the melody forward. You just have to promise you'll keep playing, no matter what. Days later, the old man didn't show up. The boy waited for hours, sitting by the empty corner where they always played. The world around him buzzed with life, but all he could hear was silence. Then, one of the regulars approached with a somber look. He passed away this morning, the man said gently. In his sleep, the boy's world stopped. It was as if every sound in the city had been muted, every color drained. That night, he sat alone with the guitar, the same one he once tried to steal. His hands trembled as he played, tears falling freely. But as the chords filled the air, something miraculous happened. People stopped. One by one, strangers gathered around him, listening in silence. And just like before, when he had played under the eyes of the bikers, something powerful unfolded. Not a performance, but a prayer. A tribute. A promise. When he finished, the crowd erupted, not in applause, but in quiet reverence. Among them, Mason and his brother stood once more, heads bowed. The boy met Mason's gaze, and the bikers simply said, he'd be proud. The boy nodded, his chest heavy but strong. That night, he understood that the music wasn't gone. It had just changed hands. And with it, the responsibility to keep the melody of redemption alive. The days after the old man's passing were the hardest he had ever faced. The streets that once felt alive now seemed hollow without that familiar sound of two guitars in harmony. Still, he returned to the same corner every evening, setting up the old man's stool beside his own. He couldn't bring himself to move it. It stood as a silent symbol, a reminder that love, mentorship, and kindness never really die. When he began to play, his voice cracked at first, but he pushed through, letting the grief pour out his melody. People began to notice. The crowds that gathered weren't there for spectacle anymore. They came for connection. Each song told the story of two lives that had found one another in chaos, built something pure, and passed it on. It was raw, imperfect, and utterly human. The boy, now a young man, sang not from money or survival, but to honor the soul who had seen goodness in him when no one else did. Every note became a prayer for those still searching for their light. One evening, as he finished his set, the distant growl of engines filled the air. He didn't even need to look up. He knew that sound by heart. The bikers rolled in slow, parking their motorcycles along the curb, the chrome reflecting the city lights. Mason dismounted first, walking toward him with that same calm presence. Still playing? He asked with a proud smile. The young man nodded. Every day, he said. For him, and for me. Mason looked at the empty stool beside the guitar and nodded solemnly. You know, he said, we talk about brotherhood like it only exists on the road. But what you had with him, that was real brotherhood too. You carried his spirit. That's what makes you one of us. The young man's eyes widened. One of you. Mason smiled faintly. The angels don't just ride. They protect, they heal, they rebuild. You've been doing that longer than you realize. The bikers formed a circle around him, silent and respectful. Mason reached into his vest and handed him a small patch, a single wing embroidered in silver. You've earned this, he said. Not for the roads you've ridden, but for the hearts you've reached. The young man took it with trembling hands, his heart swelling with emotion. The angels had once taught him justice. Now, they were showing him legacy. From that night forward, the young man's life took on a new rhythm. He traveled with the Hells Angels, not as a fighter or an enforcer, but as something different. Wherever they went, he carried his guitar. They rode to small towns, shelters, and forgotten corners of the country, playing for those who needed hope most. His music wasn't about fame, it was about healing. And with every song, every crowd, every tear wiped away, he kept the old man's promise alive. Keep playing, no matter what. One afternoon, they stopped by a rundown orphanage on the edge of a small town. The children gathered curiously around the bikes, their eyes wide with excitement. The young man smiled and sat down on the steps, pulling out his guitar. Want to hear something? He asked. Dozens of tiny heads nodded eagerly. He began to play the same song he had once performed as a trembling boy years ago, the song that started it all. Only now, it sounded different, stronger, brighter. As his voice filled the courtyard, Mason stood in the distance, arms folded, watching. He had seen countless rides, countless stories, but this one felt special. When the music ended, one little girl approached the young man and said softly, "That song made my heart feel less sad." He smiled, bending down to meet her eyes. "That's what music does," he said gently. "It reminds us we're not alone." That night, around a campfire, Mason handed him a cup of coffee and said, "You know, brother, you might not realize it, but you've become something powerful. You've turned pain into art, and art into healing. That's the kind of strength the world doesn't forget." The young man looked into the flames, thinking about the boy he once was, the thief, the runaway, the scared kid who had stolen from kindness and somehow found it again. He looked up at Mason and said quietly, "I didn't change because I wanted to. I changed because someone believed I could." Mason nodded slowly, his voice steady as he replied, "And now, you're that someone for someone else." The fire crackled softly between them, sparks rising into the night sky like prayers made of light. It was then he realized, redemption isn't something you earn once. It's something you keep alive every single day, with every song, every choice, every act of grace. Years rolled by, and the young man became known across countless towns and highways as the rider with the guitar. He wasn't famous in the way celebrities were. His fame lived in whispers and word of mouth. People would tell stories of the biker who stopped by their town, played a song that made them cry, then rode away before anyone could even thank him properly. He didn't play for applause. He played to awaken something in people, the same way someone had once awakened it in him. The Hells Angels continued to ride beside him, their bond growing deeper with every mile. They protected him not because he needed it, but because they understood that his music was protecting something greater, the belief that even the most broken souls could rise again. Mason, older now and slower on the bike, often rode just behind him, proud to see the man he'd become. Sometimes, when the road stretched empty beneath them and the wind howled through their helmets, Mason would radio him a simple phrase, "Keep playing, brother. The world needs your sound." One evening, after a long ride through the mountains, they stopped at a small town where a local cafe hosted open mic nights. The young man decided to join. When he stepped on stage, the room fell silent, not because anyone knew who he was, but because of the quiet confidence in his presence. He began to play, and as always, the music carried his story of mistakes, forgiveness, and the strange miracle of being found when he thought he was lost forever. By the end of the song, the crowd was in tears. Some stood to clap, others simply sat, overwhelmed. Among them was a teenage boy sitting near the back, thin, hollow-eyed, and clutching a worn jacket. After the performance, he approached the young man outside. "I know who you are," he said nervously. "You used to be like me." The man looked at him closely and nodded. "Then you know you don't have to stay that way," he said softly. He handed the boy his old guitar, the one he'd once stolen. "Play your truth," he told him. "It'll save you, the same way it saved me." As the boy walked away, cradling the guitar like something sacred, Mason came up beside him. "You just gave away your first instrument," he said, half smiling. The man looked toward the fading figure of the boy and replied, "No, I passed it on. The song's not supposed to end with me." And somewhere deep inside, he felt the old man's presence again, gentle, approving, eternal. Time, as it always does, continued to move forward. The young man grew older, but his purpose never wavered. His hands bore the calluses of years of travel and music, and his heart carried the weight of countless lives he'd touched. Wherever he went, people recognized the patch he wore, the silver wing the angels had given him, and they understood it wasn't just a symbol of the road, but of redemption. Eventually, Mason retired from riding, his health declining. On his final day with the club, the young man visited him at his small house near the coast. Mason was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a leather jacket that had seen decades of storms. "You still carrying the music?" he asked, his voice raspy but warm. The young man smiled faintly. "Every day," he said, "and every mile, I play a piece for you." Mason chuckled softly. "Don't play for me, brother. Play for the ones who haven't found their road yet." He paused, looking out toward the horizon where the sea met the sky. "That's what we were always riding for. Not freedom, not rebellion, redemption." The two men sat in silence for a while, watching the waves crash against the rocks, the sound merging with distant echoes of engines. Before leaving, the young man took out a small harmonica, a keepsake the old musician had given him years ago. He handed it to Mason. "You told me once that music never dies," he said quietly. "Maybe it's time you kept a little of it too." Mason's weathered hands trembled as he accepted it. "You've done good, son," he said. "Better than most." Those were the last words Mason ever spoke to him. When the news of Mason's passing reached the club weeks later, the young man rode alone for a long time. He rode through rain, through wind, through endless stretches of highway, his heart heavy but full of purpose. Every note he played that night beneath the open sky wasn't just a song. It was a farewell, a promise, and a prayer all at once. And as the wind carried the melody into the distance, he knew that somewhere, both the old musician and Mason were still listening. The road became his home once again, but it no longer felt lonely. Every mile carried a memory, the laughter of Mason, the gentle wisdom of the old musician, the trembling voice of the boy who had once taken his first chance at redemption. Their spirits rode with him, unseen but felt, guiding him through every twist and turn of the journey. The man had learned that redemption wasn't a single act. It was a rhythm, a melody that played on for those willing to listen. In small towns and forgotten corners, people began to wait for him. They didn't know his name, but they knew the sound of his guitar. He played in parks, at truck stops, in front of old diners with flickering neon signs. His music carried the weight of 100 stories, the ones who had fallen, the ones who had risen again. Every time he sang, someone in the crowd would cry, someone would smile, and someone, always someone, would find the courage to start over. One night, he stopped at a roadside bar. Inside, a man sat alone, drunk and angry, muttering about how the world had given up on him. The guitarist sat beside him, ordered 2 coffees, and said quietly, "You remind me of who I used to be." The man scoffed, but listened as the guitarist began to play right there at the bar. The melody cut through the noise, drawing in every lost soul in the room. By the time the song ended, there were no shouts, only silence and tears. The drunk man whispered, "I don't even know what to say." The guitarist replied, "You don't have to. Just promise you'll try again tomorrow." As he stepped outside into the cold night air, he looked up at the stars, the same stars that had once witnessed his fall, his forgiveness, his rebirth. They twinkled faintly, as if nodding in approval. He smiled softly, whispering to the wind, "I'm still playing." And in that moment, the roar of a distant motorcycle echoed through the night, a sound that had once brought fear, but now brought peace. The angels were still out there, watching over the roads, carrying the same light forward. Every note he played afterward was a conversation between him and the past, a duet with ghosts who never truly left. He understood now that some stories never end. They just change instruments. He wasn't just playing for those who listened. He was playing for those who couldn't anymore, ensuring their voices were never lost to the noise of the world. Years passed like pages turning in the wind. The man's hair had turned silver, his hands slower, but his soul burned brighter than ever. He had traveled thousands of miles, healed countless hearts, and built a legend not through fame, but through faith in the human spirit. His music had become a bridge between the broken and the hopeful, a sound that reminded the world that no mistake was too great to be forgiven, and no heart too shattered to be mended. On one quiet evening, he returned to the same city where it had all begun, the same street where he had once stolen from the old musician. The air smelled the same, a mix of rain and pavement, of distant food stands and faint laughter. He stood at the familiar corner, now worn by time, and set down his old guitar case. People walked by, unaware of the history that lived there. He took a deep breath and began to play. The first chord echoed like a memory, raw, haunting, beautiful. His voice trembled, but carried strength, the kind born from a lifetime of both pain and grace. Slowly, people began to gather. Strangers, passers-by, even a few bikers parked their motorcycles nearby, drawn by the sound. And then, in the middle of the crowd, he saw him, a young man holding a guitar, the same one he had given away years ago. Their eyes met, and in that instant, the circle was complete. When the song ended, the young man approached, his voice soft. "You taught me everything I know," he said. The older man smiled, shaking his head. "No, son. I just passed you the song. You're the one who kept it alive." They stood together for a moment, 2 generations of redemption bound by melody. The crowd didn't know their story, but they felt it, in every chord, every word, every tear that shimmered under the streetlight. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the old guitarist packed up his instrument, took one last look at the corner, and whispered, "Thank you." Then he walked away slowly, his heart light, his purpose fulfilled. Behind him, the young man began to play, his voice rising with hope and fire. The music lived on, weaving through the streets like the sound of redemption itself. And somewhere, far off in the distance, the faint roar of motorcycles carried the echo of a promise made long ago, proof that even the smallest act of grace can turn into a symphony that never dies. In the end, this story isn't about punishment, or even about music. It's about the power of redemption, and how a single act of grace can rewrite an entire life. The boy who once stole for survival became a man who gave everything he had to heal others. He turned his mistake into a melody, one that echoed through generations, proving that even the darkest beginnings can give birth to light. What started as a crime ended as a legacy, an unbroken song of forgiveness, courage, and rebirth. He learned that true redemption doesn't come from forgetting the past. It comes from transforming it. The same hands that once took now gave. The same streets that once knew his shame became the stage for his triumph. And the same strangers who had once judged him learned to see the beauty in a soul that dared to change. Because that's what redemption really is. Not perfection, but persistence, the quiet courage to try again when the world has already written you off. As he walked away from that corner for the last time, the faint sound of a guitar rose behind him, carried by a new generation. The melody was different, but the message was the same. No one is too lost to be found. The music had outlived its maker, but that was the point. It was never about one man's voice, but about awakening others to their own. Every note that echoed through those streets was a reminder that compassion can travel farther than judgment ever could. And maybe that's the greatest lesson of all, that life's most powerful transformations don't happen in silence, but through the echoes we leave behind. Each of us carries a song inside, a story of mistakes, forgiveness, and second chances, and the world needs to hear it. Because somewhere out there, someone is waiting for proof that change is still possible, that goodness still exists, and that broken hearts can still find harmony again. If this story touched you, let's stay alive. Share what redemption means to you in the comments, because your words might be the spark someone else needs. Subscribe to the channel to keep this flame of hope burning, and leave a like if you believe that every soul, no matter how lost, deserves a second chance. After all, the music of kindness doesn't fade when the song ends. It keeps playing in every heart that chooses to listen.